Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this online update for Summer 2021 awarding in GCSE and A-Level Design and Technology. I'm Evren Alibaba, the Subject Advisor for D&T, and we are joined by Phil Holton, the Product Manager, who will be answering questions that come through the Q&A function today. In this event, we will look at the processes in place for determining teacher-assessed grades, look at the timeline, and cover questions relating to D&T qualifications. Once I complete the presentation, I will also join Phil and focus on answering your questions. So if you have any questions at this stage while I'm going through the presentations, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and Phil will do his best to answer those. And once I finish this presentation as well, I will join him in answering as many as your questions as possible. Here we go. So in this event, we will look at key dates and deadlines. We will look at what support is available and specifically focus on the JCQ guidance, which is what all centres should be using. We will look specifically at the GCSE and A-Level D&T support and, generally speaking, talk about the NEA and how the assessment evidence should be there for the teacher-assessed grades. And as I said earlier, I think especially it's probably the most important part. We'll be focusing on FAQs and any other questions that you may have during the event today. So just a bit of context first. So this year, students will receive grades awarded and determined by you, the teachers. Students will only be assessed on what they have been taught. There won't be any algorithms, so we won't have to put them in place and take them off afterwards. Teachers will be able to draw on a range of evidence when determining grades, and these can be from optional use of the question paper that we provided, mock exams, coursework, NEA, and other work completed in the student's course of study, such as in GCSE or A-Level. Exam boards have provided guidance for teachers on the websites, and we expect to receive the teacher-assessed grades by the 18th of June, and results days will follow on the 10th and 12th of August accordingly. Here is a timeline. I'll just leave it on for a bit so you can just have a look where we are. By this stage, all centres should have submitted the internal policy. So that means the quality assurance checks, the first part of the quality assurance checks are being done at the moment. The teacher assessed grade submission will open from 26th of May. And as we mentioned earlier, it will close on the 18th of June. You can access all of these from the website and from this presentation when you receive it. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the JCQ guidance is what we're all using in determining grades. It is used across all exam boards. So please make sure you have the guidance available and you use that, which does include editable centre policy, which your centres might have used it already, assessment record sheets, head of department checklists, and the grade descriptors as well. And there are some other documents available to help too there now. We've also provided an interactive document to help you navigate the JCQ guidance. Okay, the quality assurance process this year is in 3 stages. So first stage is done at the moment, and your centres should have submitted the centre policies by the 30th of April. At this stage, there will be the virtual centre visits to confirm that we received them, and if there's any need for support and guidance, we'll be doing that. And the part 3 is the sampling, and as you know, there was a recent news on that from Ofqual as well, so there will be sampling of all centres, and that will be 1 A-level subject and 2 GCSE subjects, one of them being either English language or maths, and it will be 5 students or more for each subject, that is. Okay, so at this stage, the centre policies are submitted. So every centre had to create a centre policy to determine how they are approaching the determination of centre assessed grades. So these should have been done now and submitted by the head of centre to us. And at the moment, as I said, the stage 2 is being done and virtual centre visits are happening. Okay, so the guidance on grading. Firstly, heads of centre should ensure that students have the opportunity to show the full breadth of their knowledge and understanding in each subject based on what they have been taught. It is important that grades represent a holistic, objective judgment based on evidence of each student's performance in each subject. Evidence should be used consistently across the class or cohort wherever possible. The evidence can be of different types and can come from across the course of study. And please make sure you have seen and used this subject-specific support and guidance on our website and have access to Pearson Development Academy as well, which has useful resources, training videos, and the recording of this will appear there as well. So when arriving at a grade, you should be considering what was taught, what has been taught. You should collect the evidence accordingly, evaluate the quality of that evidence, establish whether the proposed range of evidence is suitable for all students, and assign your grade. There is also the grade descriptors, which we'll talk about in a minute, that you should use to check that the grade is accurate in a holistic manner. So we talked about that already. That will open from the 26th until the 18th. Okay, so JCQ has published grade descriptors for each subject, and they do cover different grades from this, and these are to be used once the grades are determined, and it should be used holistically. So each awarding organization has also created grading exemplifications for each specifications, and these were made available on the 19th of April. These grade exemplifications use student responses from historical examination scripts and other sources to illustrate mid-grade performance in previous summer series in which exams took place. The exemplification gives examples of the standards you will use to make grade judgments. Use of data, there has been some questions around this as well. So one source of data which is available to centres is tracking systems that provide target grades or predicted grades based on assessment inputs and data modelling. As the policy direction is that the final grade is derived solely based on performances produced by students, a grade derived based on a predicted trajectory or target grade is not permitted. Used appropriately, data on historical student and centre performance can help support the internal quality assurance process for assigning grades. The purpose of reviewing data on past performance is not to attempt to determine a student's or a centre's outcomes this summer, but as one source of evidence from examination series which operates as normal, that can inform teachers' professional judgment on the level of attainment achieved by their students. Centres should be aware of the distribution of grades awarded to students in previous series. However, grading judgments should not be driven by this data. Historical grade data should only be considered after grading judgments have been made. Okay, so additional assessment materials, awarding organizations existing assessment materials, including past papers and examiners' reports, have been made available. So these were published on the 31st of March, and following on from there on the 12th of April, additional examples were published as well. And the student versions were out following on from there too. So these materials are qualification-specific sets of questions covering key knowledge, understanding, and skills. The materials are available for GCSE, AS, and A-level subjects, with the exception of art and design. They are drawn from a variety of examination questions and from a range of papers. They do not cover any NEA components. The number, breadth, and depth of the material will vary between subjects and reflect the characteristics of each qualification. However, the assessments will draw on the equivalent of 3 series worth of examination material as a minimum. So the support materials may include past examination reports as well, mark examples of student work, and link to other information which will be helpful. These are all available on our website at the moment, and you can access them. Okay, reasonable adjustment. Special educational needs coordinators, SEND leaders, and assessors have previously been advised to continue to process the online applications as if examinations were taking place this summer. This will formalize the arrangements for the students' assessment and will ensure consistency with the Equality Act 2010. The awarding organizations will continue to provide their usual support to centers with advice and guidance on how to modify the assessment material resources for use in classroom assessment. Awarding organizations recognize that the additional assessment materials are being provided in a different way to past examination materials, and that these may present an issue for some teachers with visual impairments. In these cases, centers should contact the awarding organization, who will aim to provide extra support and guidance. Okay, appeals. The arrangements for awarding grades to students in summer 2021 include internal and external quality assurance measures which aim to ensure that on results day, students are issued with fair and consistent grades that have been objectively reached. Sharing information with students about the evidence being used as part of a center's grade determination process is important and should help to avoid issues that may otherwise arise when results are issued. Students will be able to appeal their grade. A student who is unhappy with their grade will first ask their center to check whether an administrative or procedural error had been made. Where a center does identify an error in the grade submitted to the exam board, it can submit a revised grade and a rationale for the board to consider. If the exam board is satisfied with the rationale, it will issue a revised grade. Where a center does not believe an error had been made, a student can ask the center to appeal to the exam board on their behalf. The center will submit the student's appeal to the exam board and provide evidence on which its judgment had been made. The exam board will consider whether in its view the grade reflected an appropriate exercise of academic judgment. If the exam board judges that it did not, the exam board will determine the grade that the evidence would support. The exam board will also check that the center had followed its own processes. Okay, so as we said, we do have some support available on our website. And you can access all of these through the Pearson Professional Development Academy, and through here there are live trainings that are happening. You have resources, and as I said, you will have access to the recording of these sessions as well. There are some other recorded sessions on grading for tags as well available. So worth to check this site and go through all the resources and checklists that are available for you to use. And here are some useful links once you get the presentation. There is also a page to support students, parents, and carers. So if your learners are asking information and they want to understand the processes more, you can guide them through these links as well. Okay, bit more design and technology focus now. I can see that Phil is doing quite well with the questions at the background, I think. Okay, so first we'll just talk through what changes have happened to design and technology from September 2020 onwards, and we'll talk about how we're going through the teacher assessed grade process as well. So first of all, as you all know, there were changes to the component 2, so the non-exam assessment component of the qualification from September 2020, which meant that we took out the quality and accuracy out of the assessment criteria. With this, we've introduced a proof of concept outcome instead of a high quality prototype. We also
Okay, apologies everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. Everyone's internet has gone down, so I'm happy to step in and continue the presentation if that's okay with everybody. Hopefully everyone will join us shortly, and apologies for the cutout, especially if this has happened before. Just to pick up where everyone had finished off, we had made some key changes to the GCSE and A-level qualification, as you will know, which was to encourage the opportunity for proof of concept models to be produced in place of a proper high quality prototype. This was to ensure that the delivery of the course could continue, especially where access to equipment was unavailable. Now, in terms of other changes that we made to the qualification, we did encourage the alternative capture of evidence in relation to manufacture. So if students weren't able to get into a workshop, they could evidence manufacture in another way using videos, using photographic evidence, risk assessment documents, planning documents where they were using technical language. Now, of course, assuming that your candidates have been able to continue with the NEA as planned, they can use the existing CAB booklets. So for those centres that have managed to complete a high quality manufacture, the completion of assessment at your centre should use the existing CAB documents that were available and used for the 2019 series. If you did complete the NEA using the alternative approaches, which were to produce proof of concept models in card and paper, and that modified your evidence of testing and evaluation, you are encouraged to use the alternative CAB booklets, which would have taken out the section relating to either grid 9 or grid 3.2b, depending on if it's A-level or GCSE, relating to quality and accuracy. Now, the most important thing there is that these are for your internal use. They are not submitted to the exam board Pearson ourselves because we are not moderating this year. But of course, and I think I've answered this question already in the chat, the key thing is that if you are sampled, which again, we couldn't tell you if you were to be sampled or not, but if you were to be sampled, you would require some level of internal evidence and standardization of assessment that would naturally require you to produce something like a CAB booklet to evidence the assessment. Now, the CAB booklets, both the new version and the old version, are available on the website, and you can use those to complete at your centre for your students and use those for internal documentation of the process. And I'm sure this should fit into your centre policy in terms of your planned assessment of the subject. So in regards to continued workshop access, we communicated with CLIAPS during the 2021 consultation, and hopefully you have managed to continue to use your workshops and your equipment and your tools. But if you follow the CLIAPS guidance relating to that, that should allow you continue safe access to that equipment and that resource to complete NEA, or indeed to gather any alternative evidence for D&T. And we would obviously encourage you to continue to refer to that guidance as and when it updates to make sure that you're completing any kind of activities at centre in a safe manner for your students. In terms of authentication, we reviewed our specifications during June of 2020 and made amends using an erratum notice for both GCSE and A-level. So what you were able to do is to allow students to complete NEA remotely away from centre. And our erratum notice allowed you to complete everything apart from high quality manufacture remotely. What that meant was that if you were completing a GCSE or an A-level NEA component, you should be able to complete everything to do with the course. And what you should be able to do is, if you are completing a proof of concept model, you can also complete that remotely. In terms of authentication, What that means is that the authentication is conducted in your normal way, in that you would normally authenticate by getting candidates to sign the authentication form at centre, and you should continue to do that as normal. Apologies if the slides are slightly behind on this presentation. So are components to portfolios going to be moderated by Pearson? The answer is no. So you are completing NEA at your centre and using it to calculate your teacher assessed grades as a piece of evidence amongst other evidence for the course and for the subject. Of course, if you are required to submit sample to the awarding body, you would need to compile your evidence, and your NEA may be one of those pieces of evidence that you submit to the awarding body as evidence for your candidate's grades. But we will not be moderating coursework as you would normally have seen it. Obviously, as well, we did put out information regarding the capture of digital NEA copies. And again, we would continue to encourage you to produce digital portfolios if you're able to do so. And of course, that would aid in the process of sampling should we need centres to send in some evidence and you decide to use your NEA as part of that evidence of your assessment at centre. So what should you use to decide grades for students? So the support and documents and guidance that we provided, including grade descriptors, should give you sufficient materials to start to calculate your student grades. Naturally, there will be an instinct to use your NEA, and it's how much completeness of the NEA you have as evidence, and any other internal assessments and activities that you've done. However, JCQ have produced some really great guidance that have 5 descriptors of evidence that you would use into your basket of evidence for your grade, some being more valid than other activities depending on the level and the context of control that those pieces of evidence are produced. So, for example, an exam under exam conditions of unseen material would have a much more significant weighting towards your grade than a piece of homework that was potentially produced remotely with access to the internet. And you would need to consider each piece of evidence, the context under which each was produced when you were deciding your grades. I think the most important thing is, if you look at our support and guidance, is to consider the coverage of AOs, is to consider the breadth of evidence that you have for a student. And of course, what you're looking to try to do is to really maintain the standards of previous years. So if you have any work and you're unsure of the standard against which to assess it, we would always recommend to look back at the 2019 June materials and assessment materials that we produced that might help you to establish the appropriate grade for your candidates alongside those grade descriptors. Of course, this is all decided at your centre, following your centre policy. So it's really important to consider what evidence your students have produced so far, whether they've sat any mock exams, whether they've done any remote assessment, how complete their NEA is. And a number of the questions that have come through already have been related to incomplete NEA, NEA that's maybe partly complete at this stage. So we would again encourage you to continue to produce the evidence, to continue to try and complete the NEA where possible, and only assess any work that's been produced. And what we mean by that is to avoid predicting grades based on what you think the student might produce in the future or would have done if they had the chance to. Really, it's about assessing what you have in front of you and trying to fill those gaps in where you feel candidates have been unable to produce work. Okay, so as mentioned, in terms of the completion of NEA, if you've completed it without any adaptations, and that would be that you've completed it with a full manufacture of a prototype in the workshop using resistant materials, electronics and all sorts of resources that are available to your centre, you can use the existing CAB documents to complete and map your assessment of those candidates' pieces of work. That forms a piece of evidence towards your teacher assessed grades, and you can complete that at centre, and we would obviously encourage you to make sure that you're moderating it internally as you normally would, finding colleagues within your centre to validate the assessment if you're in a one-person department, and just making sure that you've stuck to the expectations of June 2019 in terms of the quality of work. If you've completed the NEA with adaptations, apologies, the slides are jumping around a little bit. So if you have a partially completed NEA, what you'll need to do is only assess what's been complete, and that's really important. So again, just not predicting the performance of incomplete sections. So for example, if you have no evidence of evaluation and testing, mark the NEA out of a reduced number of marks. And if you have no NEA evidence at all, our advice would be to look at alternative pieces of evidence to get candidates to produce evidence at centre, be it some standalone making activities, some designing activities, and you can use the structure of the NEA assessment to try and compile lots of different types of evidence at centre. The key thing here is to not try to use the CAB booklet and fill it up with lots of different types of evidence that's unrelated to the NEA. So for the NEA assessment itself, use the CAB, use evidence that's related to the contextual challenge, and don't try and then fill missing areas in with other bits of evidence from other projects and work that you've done potentially from year 10 or other parts of the course. Any incomplete NEA can be assessed, and if you have no NEA at all, it'd be about finding the evidence elsewhere within the course. So we've made some recommendations where you might like to look at different sections of the NEA where you have incomplete sections of work. So in this example with the investigate, what you might do is you might say, okay, my candidates have no investigation evidence at all in their NEA. Here's some activities between now and the assessment date that I could get my students to complete some of this work. And again, you would be looking to compare the standard of this work to the 2019 standards for NEA. And this would encourage students to produce different types of work unrelated to the NEA contextual challenge, but something that it would be free for you to come up with and to run at your centre. For each section of the NEA, we've also made proposals. So here we have design, and I won't run through these individually, but you can see there's a number of different activities that you might like to do as alternatives to NEA evidence. And here you should be able to see relation to making, and of course, if you have no making evidence at all, including adapted evidence using proof of concept models, there's a list of activities that students might want to do at centre to support the compilation of a teacher assessed grade. When it comes to evaluate, if you have a proof of concept model, you can still test and evaluate as normal. If you have a high quality manufactured product, you can test and evaluate as normal. But if you have no evidence of this activity in your NEA, there's a list of activities here that you might like to do. And again, it'll be about maintaining the standard of that work to make sure that those are completed in line with other students in other centres. Okay, the presentation is pushed on to the section about FAQs. Now we have a live FAQs document for the qualifications that we have for GCSE and A-level available on our website. And there have been some common questions that have come up already in relation to incomplete NEA, and some of those have been answered in the chat. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move on to a couple of these questions. And apologies, the slide is really small. I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. So one of the key questions that's come up many times is how many pieces of evidence do we submit? Now, of course, there is no answer to that question, sadly. JCQ guidance recommends that it's about the quality of the evidence, and the conditions under which it was produced are the most important factors when deciding how much of a type of evidence that you produce. You may decide to use mock exams, unit-based tests, NEA, partly complete NEA, standalone activities. All of these can be used to generate your teacher-assessed grades. But the key thing is there's no single answer to say, oh, if I have 5 pieces of NEA or 5 pieces of remote working, or I have 5 mock exams, that this is going to give you my grade. It really is down to you at your centre, using your centre policy to decide this. In relation to setting standards for teacher-assessed grades this year, again, the key thing will be to use the grade descriptors that have been provided, and of course looking at how the candidates match as a best fit those grades that are available and those grade descriptors, and then looking at previous years of your candidate marks at your centre, and just making sure that you're maintaining those same standards that you've had in previous years. Now, that might mean going back to 2019 and looking at the national standards that were applied there. But also you can look at the standards of assessment that were used for November 20 series, which is the autumn series for resits. And a lot of these materials are available on the website at the moment. Okay, in terms of, oops, sorry. So in terms of identifying a holistic grade and a holistic judgment, the key thing will be to use both those grade descriptors and the grade exemplification. And again, we would recommend looking at the 2019 materials that are available, also looking at your previous cohorts from your centre, and just ensuring that a grade 5 or a grade 6, as you saw it in previous years, still applies to those same standards today. Obviously, a complete NEA and a complete mock exam and some supporting materials could be a really great way of starting to establish your teacher-assessed grade, but most importantly is following your centre policy and just making sure that the evidence and the standards of assessment are maintained on previous years. It's really important that obviously your grades don't take a massive jump up or maybe a massive decline, because of course it'll be really important to show how you've maintained the consistency over time when you've been looking at your assessment of your candidates. I think we've addressed this, I think we've addressed this question already in the chat. But do I need to complete authentication documents and CAB booklets? The answer is, as best practice, we would encourage you to do so, especially if you're planning for an internal moderation with other staff. It's really easy to use those documents between your colleagues to agree and to communicate the thinking behind your assessment at centre. And of course, should you be sampled for your subject or for your qualification, it'll be really important you have that evidence to hand to validate your marks, as you would have done in previous series. Okay, in terms of support that's available on the website, what you should see is that under our qualification page, there are a number of sections that are available for teaching and learning materials relating to support and assessment materials for centres and students. We have backdated exemplar resources, NEA examples, which are marked with commentary, and these should all be used to help you to establish a grade at your centre alongside those grade exemplification, those grade descriptors. So in terms of exemplar student materials for GCSE and A-level, we have exemplar portfolios available from 2019, but also we have adapted NEA examples, which take account of the proof of concept model, the alternative gathering of evidence, and you can use those to support your grading at centre. So both adapted approaches for NEA and existing approaches for NEA support materials are available. We also have portfolio guidance, FAQ documents, assessment guidance, summary of change documents and portfolios available alongside our grade descriptors and exemplification. So in relation to available materials for GCSE and A-level, I know we have some available series that are available for sample materials and live materials. So we have our SAMs and our AdSAMs. We have papers from an AS series for A-level and the full series for GCSE. The June papers and the October autumn series are available for you to use as a centre assessed grade activity. Okay, we haven't had everyone return at this stage, so I do apologise. So what I'll do is I'll dip into some of the questions that are coming in the chat, and apologies if I'm kind of distracted slightly while I'm just catching up on your question. But I will try and answer any questions that are coming through between now and the end of the event. So in terms of the question, when will we be asked to submit our samples, I think I put into the responses that from the 21st of June, you may be asked to present sample evidence for either A-level or GCSE, depending on how you fit into the centre sample that's requested. It's requested by the exam board. And I think if I just look at the details, it will be one A-level subject of at least 5 students, 2 GCSE subjects of at least 5 students for each. And of course, one of those will be English language or mathematics at GCSE. It will be done at random or dependent on location or dependent on the grades that you are submitting as part of your evidence to your teacher assessed grades. Okay, I'm just going to scroll past the number of messages about lost sound. So will this recording be sent out to everyone once they've signed up? Yes. So once this event is completed, it will be compiled and a transcript as well as the video will be sent out to everybody connected and registered for this course. Okay, so if we can't use the workshops, how do we demonstrate the making techniques? So when we envisage the modifications for 2021 assessments for NEA, we did envisage that some students would have zero access to workshops. So in this situation, we envisaged that the capture of video evidence, candidates setting up machinery, talking about step-by-step processes, the techniques that they would apply, health and safety decisions that they would make, any ongoing planning that they would use, any quality checks that they would conduct during the making stage, all of this could be compiled as evidence of a demonstration of an understanding of a making technique. Of course, the idea would be that they would manufacture the product, but through the process of using craft materials or paper-based materials and card, they could demonstrate techniques such as nets and templates and jigs and formers. And all of these approaches could be used and compiled as evidence in the NEA without the actual access to a workshop in its normal year. Ideally, you would want to use maybe video, written, photographic evidence, sound recordings. Potentially, they could use previous evidence from year 10 or anywhere captured within the GCSE course of the manufacturing, if you were really struggling to evidence the kind of the skills and the manufacturing activities that would normally be compiled into the NEA. If students had full access to the workshop and have made a final prototype, can we assess using the quality and making section? Yes, absolutely. So our existing 2019 CAB booklet is available and it has the full marks. So for GCSE and A-level, you will have the full 100 or 120 marks available in the CAB, and you would assess as normal. If you've used the modified approach, we've taken out the quality and accuracy grids from the GCSE and the A-level course, and that alternative CAB is also available, and you'll see a little description underneath the title on the website, and you can use those, and they reduce the marks down to, I think, 88 or 112, I think it was, for the GCSE and A-level course. So with regard to the JCQ grading criteria, is this for the overall grade? And then we are still using the specific guidance for the NEA. So you assess your NEA using the CAB booklets through the available marks. If you have sections missing or partly complete, you can only mark and assess the sections that are complete. And then you would use that as a single piece of evidence within your generation of a teacher assessed grade. And if you look at the JCQ grading criteria, it does recommend that you can use alternative evidence such as homeworks, remote produced assessment, mock exams, papers, unit tests. All of these things can be used to help you to generate a grade. And the key thing is that your centre policy should indicate how you are validating that grade and how you are endorsing that that grade is valid as a comparison to previous years. So your NEA becomes part of that grading process at centre, and you mark your NEA as normal. We have grade boundaries from 2019, which we have used throughout Year 11 to guide students. These will be used in conjunction with the published criteria to judge levels awarded. Can you confirm this is appropriate process? So that was Paula. So Paula, in regards to grade descriptors and grade exemplification, please use the updated materials that are on the website. They are more than likely the same ones that you've been using at centre, but obviously it's really important that as a national standard, everyone's using the same grade descriptors. So please make sure that you've direct yourself to the teaching and learning section of the website and look for those updated grade boundaries and those grade descriptors. If you have used previous grade boundaries for internal assessment, obviously, we don't have published grade boundaries for our papers and our NEA, so we couldn't possibly publish those and provide those to you. But the key thing is to use those grade boundaries and descriptors, so those grade descriptors and those grade exemplifications when you're establishing your marks at centre. Next one. So the assessment questions which were released by Edexcel are all past papers. If the students have already seen those questions in previous mocks and class tests, are they allowed to be used again for the assessment evidence? The answer is yes. And again, you would need to consider the fact that candidates have seen these before, so they've had an attempt at these already. So they wouldn't hold as equivalent value to some unseen assessment materials. So if you had an unseen paper and candidates sat that would be brilliant, and that would be a highly valuable piece of assessment to use at centre. But knowing that the candidates have seen all the materials already, if you use that as part of a process of generating your teacher assessed grades, just make sure that you're devaluing that evidence because of the nature of the fact that they know the questions or they've had an attempt at that before. And again, it's perfectly valid to use that evidence within your teacher assessed grade generation, but the most important thing is that you recognise it has less value than unseen materials. So if some students have not had the opportunity to complete NEA sections where others in the group have, are we able to assess against completed sections specific for each student, or do we have to draw a line in the sand at a particular point? I think we've addressed this question already, but essentially mark the students and mark what they've completed. And if you decide that it's more valid to cut them all off at the same point and you decide to do that, that's no problem at all. But again, you want to think about how you've covered the AOs, you want to cover how the course has been covered and how you've remained in line with previous years in terms of the standards and the clarification of that grade. If you decide to assess each student individually, and if one student has more complete than another, again, that's completely valid. But you'll need to think about those students that have less in the NEA as part of their evidence, and you might look to see if they could produce an alternative task or have evidence coming from other piece of evidence elsewhere in the course. And that's kind of key for you guys to decide at your centre. Next question. Is there a clear definition of evidence compared to evidence of records? For example, if a piece of evidence was a mock sat in Year 10, is the evidence the papers or would a table of results for students suffice as evidence? I don't fully understand that question, but if it's in relation to evidence that's been collated over Year 10 and 11, and they've sat a mock exam in Year 10, and you have a breakdown of marks, Again, that is really useful evidence to use, and consider whether it's unseen materials or it's materials that they've been kind of prepared for in a different way. So, for example, if you produce a mock exam that has a reduced number of sections or has multiple choice questions, more than longer answer questions, consider how that evidence compares to previous years, and would that be less valid or more valid evidence for your teacher assessed grades. What would the sample be, the typical top and bottom and a few in between? Again, the sample hasn't been defined as yet. We know it's more than 5 candidates from your cohort if you are selected to provide a sample. The main thing will be is that you have a capture of evidence that validates your grade. So would it be your top candidate, your bottom, and some in the middle? I mean, that's what is used in a normal valid assessment year. But in this case, I would kind of anticipate that we would have to define the criteria under which we are asking for candidate evidence to be submitted. Because obviously some candidates will have different types of evidence compared to others potentially within your cohort. So a top, middle and bottom might not be the most valid approach, but we will certainly push some information out to you guys once we have that answer. So I'll leave that one unanswered as a definite response, and we'll come back to you in due course. Which CAB do you complete if you've not completed the NEA? So again, if you're using the CABs at centre to help you to assess your student work, use the one that's appropriate for your NEA approach. If you've gone for a high quality made outcome, use the original CAB. If you've used a proof of concept approach, use the adapted CAB that removes that grid. If you have incomplete sections of the NEA, you can use effectively any CAB if it's not impacted by that quality and accuracy assessment grid. So it's all about assessing what the candidates have actually produced. That's the key thing. What happens if some have made and some haven't? Returning from the second lockdown, pupils' NEA was at different points. Again, this is a difficult one because we know that some candidates perform better in manufacturing activities, and some might gain a lot of significant marks in an NEA. But remember, you're just assessing what has been completed. So if a candidate has no making completed, you might want to look at getting them to do some activities between now and the submission of grades that can help you to establish their manufacturing ability. And if you have candidates that have completed the manufacture, you can assess those as part of a basket of evidence, as part of the NEA, or as a standalone activity. I think the key thing is that you're trying to make it fair for all students. So if you know that some students could do with some more manufacturing to build up your understanding of their ability, then you should try and create some of those activities at centre if they're not going to complete those through the NEA. Would I need a CAB booklet for every pupil or just the ones you want to see? Again, if it's part of your internal assessment approach, we would encourage everybody to have a CAB booklet completed, and we know that can be quite time consuming, but it'd be down to you at centre to follow your centre policy and to justify your grades internally. Once those grades are sent to us and you are chosen for sample, if that's the case, we would want to be able to pull certain students with their CAB evidence, with their normal supporting evidence, if that's what you're going to send to us. If you don't use a CAB booklet, you would need to provide us something else to validate the assessment approaches you've used at centre. And of course, we'd want to see that you've moderated internally and you've checked other teachers' work as part of your assessment. How do you suggest we approach marking students who have not engaged in remote working to complete components of the NEA at home since Christmas and before we had 2 periods of isolation? So hopefully we've kind of covered some level of answer on this one, but if you have students that have not been able to complete work, only assess what they've completed and move on to actual activities that you can assess in its entirety. And just remember to consider how it was produced, when it was produced, under what conditions, and how complex that activity was. That will be the key thing. Am I right in thinking we would only be required samples of up to 5 students, or is this an urban myth? So the Ofqual guidance recommends that at least 5 students would be part of the sample for a GCSE or A-level subject. So I would be mindful of that, but we couldn't tell you at this time a definitive answer of how many samples would form how many pupils would form part of your sample? Apologies. Would a sample include all assessment material used, including question papers? So one of the questions that came up in another one of these events was that we did a mock exam in year 10, but we didn't keep the papers. We threw them in the bin, or we gave them back to the students and they've been lost. It's absolutely fine to use evidence and grading and marking of student activities before the Ofqual and JCQ guidance was published as part of your calculation of tags. So you can consider work that's been produced in year 10. You can produce work, consider work that's been produced before the JCQ guidance was published. The key thing is that if you are asked to be sampled, or you're sampling internally and you're moderating internally, what physical evidence can we see? What can you actually produce? Are there question papers? Are there NEA? Is there manufacture? Are there a range of activities? And how are you able to look at these to help you to balance those judgments? But you can, by all means, use grading and activities and assessment that has occurred before the JCQ guidance was published as part of your consideration. I think the main thing is that you can't base your entire teacher assessed grade on evidence that you don't no longer have and can't produce as a sample. So the key thing is you have materials available to sample. Can I clarify, would you expect an authentication sheet completed by each student? Again, we would encourage you to authenticate students as you normally would in a normal series. Should you be sampled, that would be really important for us to see that authentication evidence. And again, because we've modified the way in which work can be done remotely from home or can be tackled at centre in different ways, it's just key that you are able to authenticate the student's work as normal, and you can recommend that that student has produced that piece of work and you feel confident in using that to support your teacher assessed grades. Okay, some of these questions I think we've tackled now. So how would we evidence a Year 10 skills project? So if you have photographic evidence, if you have documented written evidence, you have activities that a Year 10 student has completed and you want to use that as part of your evidence, that's great, that's completely valid. If you have no evidence of that activity, but you have assessment tracking documents, you can use those activities to support your teacher assessed grades, and you wouldn't be asked to produce that evidence as part of that. The key thing is that you must have significant evidence from elsewhere in the course to validate your grades. So it's absolutely fine to consider what they've done in Year 10, but if you don't have any evidence at all of Year 10, then make sure you do have evidence produced within the Year 11 course or available as part of your sample and your evidencing. What grade boundaries do you recommend when the NEA is partially complete? Again, just assess what they've completed in the grids, using the grids marks available and the descriptors available. Base that on the 2019 standards portfolios or the updated portfolios that are available on the website, and try to make sure that you're marking only what is complete. So you might feel that it's unfair to assess a student on manufacture, for example, if they've only completed a very small part of it, and that might pull down their overall mark. You might decide not to include that as part of the overall grading for that NEA. And again, that's just a piece of evidence at your centre. In the autumn, we did a full mark 100 mark mock paper. For this summer, we followed guidance and set mini papers using the published exam board materials. The previous mock mark was 100 mark, so 100%. Are we okay to convert the mini papers to a percentage in order to draw comparisons to the evidence? It would be a very risky approach to try and use a calculating method to scale up or scale down any pieces of assessment. So we would certainly discourage you from doing that activity, because a full exam paper has been balanced against the AOs, against different types of questioning. So taking a smaller component or a smaller unit of assessment and scaling that percentage up is something that we wouldn't encourage you to do. Certainly you would want to use full mock papers as a significant piece of evidence, and you would use the full NEA as a significant piece of evidence. But where you have mini assessments, unit-based assessments, or maybe mock papers that have reduced numbers of questions, those papers and those types of assessments start to change, and therefore it's dangerous to actually decide that I'm going to multiply that up to get a mark out of 100 or 100%. It'd be better to just take it and assess it out of the marks that's available and just to consider that as its piece of evidence on its own. I hope that makes sense. What happens if you've produced no practical but only CAD models? Our modified CAD booklet does allow for virtual models in place of high quality manufacture, and virtual models do fall under the definition of proof of concept models. So you can use CAD models, screen images, animations to prove the consideration of quality of manufacture. So you might look at the tolerance of CAD models and how they slot together. You might use technical drawings to show how assembly has been considered or material thicknesses have been considered. There's lots of things that a CAD model could allow you to do to consider the quality and accuracy of the design that a candidate's produced. And again, you can use our modified CAD booklet, and you can use those modified approaches to complete that. Please clarify how past grading data should indicate overall grade distribution versus keeping consistent standards. Presumably, if we have a strong or a weak year group, they should be held to the same standard and thus better or worse grades overall. So one of the factors that is considered at your centre is the performance of candidates at your centre in previous years, of course. So part of that data will be used to consider your centre assessed grades, your teacher assessed grades, apologies. And it's really important that you look back and refer to those standards to make sure that in 2019, a grade 9 is still looking like a grade 9, and a grade 7 still looks like a grade 7, and a grade 5 still looks like a grade 5 as you apply those same standards to this year's assessment. The most important thing with grade distribution is to not worry about grade distribution. It's to look at the evidence and the way in which you're generating your grades for those students. So if you can validate their grade against our grade descriptors and our grade exemplification, that's the model approach that we want you to use. If you have NEA examples and you have assessment examples from previous years, and it looks like that the candidate's producing evidence at the same level, then that shows you that you're doing the right thing. I think the most important thing is to avoid trying to get a distribution of grades. The key thing is to assess your students in your cohort. And if they're slightly stronger or they're slightly weaker, their evidence will support those grades. And of course, if you're then asked to sample that, we will just look to clarify and to validate that your assessment at centre has happened in the right way. And if it has, then your grades will be supported. Which CAD booklet do you complete if you've not finished the NEA? Again, you can use either of the CAD booklets, but if you've used a proof of concept approach, use the 2021 modified CAD booklet. If you've used the final high quality prototype, use the original 2020 CAD booklet. If you haven't produced any manufacturer at all, it doesn't matter which CAD booklet you use, but again, it's for your own internal moderation and assessment only. Are there grade boundaries for the GCSE October 2020, please? I'm afraid not. We don't have grade boundaries available that would support you on this. But again, if you refer to those exemplar responses that are available on the website, this should help you to assess that component. So how much detail should we give the students when telling them the results of their assessment? Percentage or grades achieved. So it's really important that you don't release the teacher assessed grades to the students. You submit those to the awarding body first. Make sure then when the grades are released to your centre and they're released to the students, there is an appeals process available. And again, all this information is available online, and also your SLT will know this process quite thoroughly, having been part of the process for centre policy generation. So it's really important that you produce the assessment and the grades as teachers yourself, and just make sure that you don't publish those grades to the students prior to them being sent to the awarding body and being published. There is a process in place for students to challenge the assessment grades that they've received. So first of all, there's an internal process that can take place at centre, and also there is an external process that can take place if the candidate feels that the grades have been moderated or are unfair. Can virtual models of templates, etc., be used? Absolutely. Again, it's another piece of evidence. So make sure that virtual models are part of your assessment if you have those instead of full manufacture. Can modelling evidence be used for the making section of the NEA? Yes, and again, if you've used that proof of concept approach, it's really important that you use that modified CAB booklet for your internal assessment if that's what you're going to use. Does there have to be evidence of making a manufacturer? Can that section in the NEA just not be covered and marked? Absolutely, I think we've answered that question now. If you haven't got any manufacturer or making, you don't have to have it in the NEA, just mark the NEA out of less marks, don't complete those grids, and then find alternative evidence, get candidates to make things or do things at centre that gives you an alternative type of evidence that you can use to make a judgment of your students. Of course, you do have time now to actually complete the NEA. You've still got manufactured to be completed, but of course it's dependent on what's going on at your centre. So I am worried how much teachers will devalue the evidence or not on examination questions compared to others without more specific guidance on percentage grade boundaries and the inconsistencies this will create across different centres. Absolutely, and it's really important that the grade descriptors and the grade exemplification are used by all centres to make sure that we stick to those national standards that are set. And it's really important that you look at those. And of course, if you can collaborate with other centres and other teachers to support and moderate each other's work. That's another way in which you can ensure that you're working and assessing at centre level in the correct way. But we do have sufficient published materials on the website that should help you to validate those grades and to validate that assessment at your centre. Please clarify, how does sampling work? Everyone has understood it differently. So sampling is generated post result submission by the centre. And it's done at random or based on location or based on if your grades are significantly different from previous cohorts. And again, that's all on the Ofqual website. I think the update was published on the 22nd of April. So if you look for the quality assurance for GCSE, AS and A-level information for schools, on the 22nd of April, Ofqual published that. And they've set out quite clearly how the purpose and the process of sampling will take place, and the time periods against which you'll have to submit that sample evidence to the awarding body. Can you tell us how the AOs fit within the grade descriptors, please? Which parts link where in the descriptions? So what it might be useful to do is if we provide you a little bit more guidance and instruction in the FAQ document that's on the website in terms of AO coverage. But if you actually look at the AO coverage for the exam, if you go into the specification and just look at how component 1 and component 2 match the AOs, what you should be able to find is that if you're missing evidence from, so it's like, for example, like AO3 or AO4, you might decide to pull that from the NEA or to find alternative evidence to complement the NEA, or you might find that actually a specific unit or section within the component 1 exam might be your approach to getting a good AO coverage. But I think what we can do is we can provide you a little bit more update and guidance on that, certainly if you're having concerns about a good spread of AO coverage to validate your assessment of students at the centre. If we have assessed the NEA minus evaluation and have a mark, can we work out grade boundaries based upon what the percentage of the marks equates to? So again, that sounds like scaling approaches, and we want to discourage centres from scaling. So if you haven't got the evaluation section complete, just mark out of less marks and take that as a standalone piece of evidence. So if you end up marking out of, I don't know, 60 or 50, depending on how many grids you remove because of incomplete sections, that's no problem. Just take that as a piece of evidence and then complement it with other pieces of evidence as per the JCQ guidance. Will students be penalised for not having manufacturing assessed this year? Again, we do know that students can perform slightly better in manufacturing, and that might bump up their marks, but there's nothing to say that you can't complete potentially some sections of NEA. You can't look at other manufacturing that the students have done throughout the GCSE course, or maybe you want to set some manufacturing activities between now and the submission deadline to just give you an indication of that student's ability, and again compare them against 2019 standards for work, and just to see that you are validating those grades in the same way. How many pieces of evidence do we need for each AO? Again, there's no answer to that. The key thing is that you feel confident that you've covered the full set of AOs for the course, you've covered all aspects of the course in some way. You've given students the opportunity to complete evidence and to do activities, or a range of different activities under different contexts, some remote working, some working independently, some working under strict conditions without access to the internet. The key thing is that you have lots of different types of evidence that supports your grade. And again, you're maintaining those previously set standards. Does the initial sample released on the 21st of June include just the NEA or all pieces of evidence? So again, when a sample is requested, it will ask for numerous pieces of evidence. More information will be released at the point when we have this, but certainly if you're going to use NEA as a significant piece of evidence to define your teacher assessed grade, that will be something that you will want to submit. Likewise, if you've used mock exams, you might want to use some papers that will be completed by the students. But again, it depends on the evidence you have available at centre. And of course, we will be highly likely that we'll be looking for digital submissions of those pieces of evidence for your students. So the key thing is just to build up that bank of evidence, that basket of evidence of lots of different activities that can be submitted alongside your judgments and why that is reasoned to create your teacher assessed grade. Okay, just looking at the questions that have come through, I think I've pretty much covered everything up to the most recent submission of a question at 5:05. So at this point, I can see that the group chat has had a number of questions come through, and apologies I haven't responded to those in everyone's absence. But what I'll do is I will review those questions that are in there, and the recording of this presentation will be sent out to all of you when the event is completed, and that'll be sent to you by email. And what we'll do is we'll look to compile some common questions that are coming up both in the group chat and also in the Q&A here, and we will add those to the FAQ documents, and I'll get Everin to send that information out to you as soon as possible. I'm just looking in the group chat for just a couple more minutes to see if there's anything there that we can answer straight away. So let's have a look. So yes, depending on where you are in the NEA, if you have time and the conditions under which you can complete the NEA, we would naturally encourage you to do so, because you have a structure for assessment, you have a CAB booklet, you have example evidence from previous series and other students in your cohort. So you have quite a lot of resources available should you complete the NEA to then be able to assess that and to feel, really confident in your assessment and your use of that evidence towards your grade. If you are unable to complete NEA, or NEA has completed at your centre, or you've decided to not complete NEA for whatever reason, the key thing will be to look at alternative pieces of evidence and the conditions under which those are produced. So if you decide to set a task in class and it's under certain conditions that make it more challenging, and you're able to assess certain aspects of the NEA, you can complete those activities as an alternative to the NEA. I think the key thing here is not to try and fill in the gaps of the NEA with evidence from elsewhere. So just when assessing the NEA, just assess what connects to the contextual challenge that the student has completed. So if they've done the coastal contextual challenge for GCSE, don't try and fill gaps in the NEA with evidence of, making storage holders and to doing electronics if it's unrelated to that NEA project. Treat the NEA and assess it with what's complete, and just package that up, do an assessment on it, and decide how that relates to your overall basket of evidence. And if you've got gaps in manufacture, you've not completed evaluation, you've got some initial ideas that you'd like to do more time on, find those pieces of evidence from the students, encourage them to keep doing some stuff. But likewise, try not to make sure that you're trying to kind of cram in other activities to just fill in the gaps in the NEA, because it's not about that anymore. It's about just validating what the students have completed. I'm just going to look into the Q&A one more time. Okay, there's some great chat going on in the group chat, but I can't necessarily see any outstanding questions that haven't been answered. If I'm wrong, apologies. So what I'll do is I'll round up there, and we will look at the questions and the answers that we've submitted through the process of this event, and we'll compile those for you into the FAQ document, just to make sure that we have sufficiently answered everyone's questions. I hope you found this really useful, and again, a massive apologies that everyone's internet cut out. He has been messaging me during the event to kind of keep a tab of how it's going, but what we can say is that hopefully we'll be able to answer, if not have answered, as many of your questions as possible, and anything that we have missed, please communicate to Everin or communicate through the normal channels, and we will pick up those questions. And thank you again for your time in attending this event.